Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Friday Morning at the Fun House alongside Mr. Martin Popoff. What's going on,
Yes,
my
morning,
friend?
sir. Yeah, nothing much. Nothing. Well, we're getting a lot of snow. It's definitely winters here. So yeah,
Yeah, we
that's the
got we got a little bit yesterday. We got like a dusting. It like snowed on and off all day, but it never really accumulated all too much.
yeah.
But we've had so far many snow occurrences this year, probably more than the
Right.
last couple of years combined. But we haven't had the big snow event, right? Like we haven't had the foot or the 8 inches. We've had lots of little 1 to 2 to 3 inches,
Yeah, yeah,
quite a few actually already so far this year, or
yeah,
this season, I should say. So
yeah.
because the calendar year is still young, right? We haven't had that much
Yeah,
this
I
year,
know.
but
I
it
know.
started before Christmas.
Winter in Toronto is absolutely most brutal in February and even March. Like the coldest days of the year, I swear, in Toronto are March now. You know, it's very strange.
Well, that's been going on here in New York as well. We've had the winter has extended. So whereas in the past, mid late December into early mid January, you already were experiencing real winter weather. Now it's just like February is usually pretty bad. And
Yeah,
then it carries over into March and sometimes early April is still really cold and chilly. So it never used to be that way, but
yeah,
Mother Nature has different plans for us, I guess, right?
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
So we're back here to do a sequel of sorts to last episode where we talked about instances with bands where they take a risk, and in the ones in the last episode where those risks and that experimentation, that's something different that they did, really worked out well. Well, today we're going to flip the coin and we're going to go those instances where a band took a risk, they decided to change things up a bit, whatever it might be, whether it's an album, a tour, or whatever, and the results were not so kind. So we're going to call this one the risks that sucked episode, so to speak. So we've got albums, we've got examples, we got all sorts of stuff. So we're going to kind of be all over the place here, but that's how we roll here at the Funhouse. So what did we do last time, Martin? Two at a time? I don't remember. Three at a
I
time?
think we went 3-3-4, maybe, right?
Yes.
3-3-4.
Three, one. Yep,
Okay.
yep, exactly.
And we didn't compare notes. So it's going to be interesting to see if we've got some overlap here,
I
right?
think we might have a couple today, but we'll see. Maybe
Okay.
not.
All right.
Maybe
All right.
not.
I don't think we're going to have an overlap with this
Maybe
first
not.
one.
Yeah, I
So
don't
my
know.
first one is Infinity Records. Remember they put out this TKO album. I love this album. Brad Sinsel led band. It's kind of like poppy hard rock. That's what the band looks like. But Brad Sinsel told me kind of the story of this label. So Infinity was an MCA imprint, and they rolled the dice big time on an album called Pope John Paul II Sings at the Festival of Sacrosong. So they put out a big album by the Pope, and it was heavily promoted and all this, and it didn't sell, and it absolutely sunk the label. The next TKO album wouldn't come out until I think about 4 years later on a metal label, and it was really good, right? They had what did they have? They had In Your Face and then Below the Belt, which are both really good albums, way heavier than this, because they adjusted. The funny thing is, this is almost like hard rock crossed with power pop. So it's like a little Stixy. And you can tell by the look. And then they got heavy. But so I thought that was a pretty funny one, and it absolutely sunk the label. Let's see, MCA pulled the plug November '79, so this is a '79 album, and and it says the collapse of Infinity also coincided with rising costs of manufacturing for vinyl records, huge slump in the music business, blah, blah, blah. So 79 into 80. I had to look this up for another project I was working on. Contrary to belief, 79 wasn't actually a recessionary year. In the world or North or America, say, but 80 on was recessionary kind of thing, so they say. So I thought that was funny, and the other thing that happened was that's similar to this uh, is Casablanca Records rolled the dice early on a Johnny Carson album and promoted that thing super heavily. And I think it crept its way to gold, but they spent a lot of money promoting that. So that was a similar thing. So that's my
And I
first
remember
one.
at the time that people were, because if you look at that album cover,
Mm-hmm.
kind of a striking logo and sort of, it's colorful, and then that awful album art.
Yeah.
And people are like, what the hell is this, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I remember this being a 4 out of 9, with our crazy rating system, right? It had some heavy songs on it and then some, but it's a very interesting sound. So okay, so my second example is Alice Cooper Muscle in Love Packaging. Remember when Muscle, this is my Russian dodgy boot here, but remember when that came out, it was in a cardboard box. So it was oversized. It didn't quite fit in the racks. It took up a lot of space. And then it had the stain along the bottom. So there were a lot of returns because people thought it was stained. And I thought, a similar one to that would have been the Sticky Fingers one with the zipper, which ruined a lot of the albums in front of it. And in a lot of cases, the albums in front of it was another copy of Sticky Fingers, right? So it broke through the cellophane and it dented. So that somewhat of a fail. But these kinds of fails get you a lot of publicity. Muscle of Love just wasn't a very commercial album anyways, so it didn't do that great. But it's more of a fail for the record company because these things also cost a lot of money to do them, and then it doesn't do so well out there, right? So my next example is let me see, where are my copies of this here? Three at a time. So my next example is Quiet Riot deciding that we're going to get rid of Kevin Dubrow, right? So Kevin had kind of a big mouth. This was the big hit, 6 times platinum, and first metal album to hit #1 and all that. There's a fully signed Bad Boy, and then we've got a Condition Critical, and so he's there also for QR3 in 1986, but he's not on QR. This is almost like MSG2 all over again, right? Paul Shortino singing. So, it's just an example of this idea that you really got to try a lot harder and not get rid of your lead singer, because I did a podcast episode of History in 5 Songs where I argued that the singer is everything, right? The singer is 75% of the band, and in Quiet Riot's case, it absolutely was as well. He's the front man. He's a good front man. He's a great singer. He's got that great voice. But yeah, he ticked everybody off. And a similar one is this band here. Well, this is almost a perfect shirt to make the example. So a famous fail is Roger Waters goading Pink Floyd. Oh yeah, try Continue On Without Me, right? Let's see how that works out, right? And fact is, it didn't work out great creatively. No one thinks a heck of a lot about the
commercially it's
2 albums.
Yeah.
Commercially, it was huge, and it's like, it proved to the fans in that case that the brand was big enough to carry on, because that brand was absolutely so gargantuan. Plus, they waited a long time to do it, and they had a second lead singer in the band as well, so that helped. But creatively, it didn't do that great. But again, it's this thing you really got to try work it out with your lead singer kind of thing. So it's always a big risk.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the interesting dilemma, right? How hard do you try to make it work out when everybody hates each other, right? But it is, I mean, having a band is having a business, especially when you're successful. So you got to make it work. I mean, there have been instances where they could look at the Black Sabbath situation, couldn't make it work with Ozzy anymore. He's got to go. You bring in someone else. Well, that turned out pretty good, but the Quiet Riot thing, I mean, they just fell off the face of the earth.
Yeah.
But you have to wonder, Martin, because I think their stock was already starting to slide even after Metal Health, right? I mean, that Condition Critical did okay, but not nearly as much. So that was already starting to happen. But
yeah,
it's hard. Yeah, that's hard to replace the lead singer. Really is.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, that was my first 3.
All right. My first one here today. So on the last episode, I mentioned Yes 90125 is taking a big risk and changing things up. And you know what? It really, really worked out well. Well, I'm going to stick with Yes again here for today. So a few years later, you have basically the Yes West lineup of the band. You also have this other incarnation called Anderson, Wakeman, Bruford, and Howe. So they came up with this, the management came up with this good idea, and I'm sure the record label threw a lot of money at them. But why don't we kind of get everybody back together and do this thing called Union, which at the time, right, seemed like a great idea. I saw that tour 3 times. The tour itself was fantastic, right? Because you can hear you got Trevor Rabin playing next to Steve Howe, you got Rick Wakeman, you got Mr. Tony Kaye, you got John Anderson, you got Bill Bruford, Alan White, Chris Squire. Everybody's up there, right? It's all fun. They're playing all the songs in the round. Great, right? But then they decide we're going to put an album out. So I remember at the time we were all thinking, oh, how awesome is this going to be? And then Union comes out, and you're like, wait a minute, who are all these other people playing on here? And it doesn't sound like Trevor Rabin's on that song and whatever. And then you find out that basically this is like a hodgepodge of things that the two incarnations were working on. This is no union. This is not all those guys playing together. And,
Yeah.
at the time I was like, yeah, I would have waited forever is really good. Shock to the System is fun. Lift Me Up is a good pop song. But really, you can totally tell like which songs were done by Yes West and which songs were done by Anderson, Wakeman, Bruford. How there's other songs on here, you're like, I don't even know who's on here. And I think this has not held up well at all. And I think a lot of people were disappointed with it at the time. I kept trying to give it its due and like, it's okay, it's okay. But all these years later, man, I look back on this, I think this was an epic fail because you had all these guys together. You couldn't do something better than this, or at least more being Yes, because this is not Yes at all. Um, and then, of course, after this came out, the whole union idea was done. We had Yes West getting back together again. That lasted one more album, and then whatever. But yeah, big fail. That's my first one for today.
Yeah. Pete, do
I'm
you
gonna
have
go with
more?
low
Do you have
hanging.
more yes coming up at any point?
No,
Oh, okay, I'll just comment quickly. So, I mean, was Tales from Topographic Oceans a risk? Was Drama a risk? I mean, I
a
guess
lot
in
of
both
risks in the
cases,
catalog. Yeah,
yeah. One is do we go with this crazy concept? One is do we really try to replace John Anderson? And then this guy turns out to not be the greatest frontman or have the biggest confidence and we all know that creatively that was not we're all happy with Drama, but we know commercially it was a risk that failed, right? So
yeah, yeah, for
yeah.
sure. And depending on who you ask, Tales from Topographic Oceans is some people it's a great triumph, to others it's a fail. Right. So yeah, it could be seen either way. Yeah, there's a lot in the Yes catalog. John Davison, uh, you know, how do you replace a legend, right? Even though they did it on Drama, but they've done it now. I mean, John has appeared on a lot of albums with Yes so far. So and yeah, it's hard to replace someone like that for
Yeah.
sure. All right, some low hanging fruit here. We've talked about this one before. I absolutely think this album is an epic fail and a suck, and they took a big risk and it didn't work out at all. Queen, Hot Space. They hinted at this a little bit on the game with a couple tracks, but Queen putting out a pretty much an almost entire album of kind of like urban pop and funk and whatever you want to call this album, and the public just was kind of like revolted against this. I mean, this didn't sell well at all. They didn't even tour this album for here in North America, and it's generally looked back as probably their worst album in their catalog. I know you kind of like it. I don't like this at all. Even like the heavy song "Put Out the Fire" is not a great track. It's pretty good to me. "Under Pressure" is the best song on the album, and it's not indicative of all the rest of it. But I just don't think it works at all. I know that this is basically Freddie and John's album, but yeah, it doesn't work for me at all. Hot Space. And then I'm going to go with an album from 1984 from a band that I think their charismatic frontman, lead singer, songwriter, flute player decided he wanted to embrace all the modern technology that was going on at the time and do an album that was very indicative of the mid 80s. And that's Jethro Tull, Under Wraps. It's filled with all sorts of synthesizer stuff. There's a lack of guitar on here. There's really not all that much flute on here as well. And it's filled with all these really short songs. And sadly enough, I think that some of the songs are not bad, just produced and presented in this way. It just doesn't sound like Jethro Tull at all. And again, another album that many people, the Jethro Tull contingent, look at this as their least successful album. It did not sell well. And it's just not the Jethro Tull that most people want to hear. Where's the guitars? Where's the flute? Where's the acoustic guitar? Why all the synthesizer? Why all these kind of short songs that just kind of embrace new wave and electronica and all that? And just an epic fail for the band, which with their next album, they would right the ship and get back to business. So, yeah, it's my last of the first three.
Nice. Okay. All right. My next one is Sony signs Aerosmith in 1991, summer of 91 for $25 million. I mean, this is just bad timing in terms of a signing situation because you had a big drop for Nine Lives and just push play and on and I've always been fascinated with this idea of you're dealing with with 5 volatile personalities. They've got this past. You don't know what's going to happen, right? And it just seemed like, obviously they're going off the massive success of the Geffen years. I mean, 3 albums in a row that were absolute juggernauts, commercial juggernauts for them. And so that happens. And I had a similar one that's almost even more egregious. Warner Brothers re-signing in 1996 REM for $80 million. And, apparently, as the story goes, there was a lot of money in the industry. CDs were selling great. They were expensive. It was just reselling the old catalog sort of thing. But in REM's case, a guy was about to leave the band. Bill Berry, the drummer, was about to leave the band, and their sales went right down. Up was a commercial dud, and they were just kind of worse going on sort of thing. So yeah, it's just the odd thing of the timings of some of these things based on the past. But you just, how are they to know? Like, REM's got 4 guys in the band. How are they to know one guy's going to go like immediately, right? I mean, these things probably should be disclosed if people think such stuff like this is going to happen, right? Kind of thing. But it's so funny how you've got these big, complicated, multi-million-dollar deals, and it's all based on what's going on inside the head of a rock star, or 4 or 5 of them, and how much they like each other and stuff, right? And in Aerosmith's case, it's kind of like they go into paralysis by analysis mode where they're just constantly overworking these songs over and over again and doing so many extra demos and taking so much time to do these things and fighting how many ballads are supposed to be on the albums. And so, yeah, it just seemed like bad timing there. And I've got more of a focused one, I guess, for my next one. AC/DC not bringing back Mutt Lange for flick of a switch, right? And in this situation, I think most of us consider it a creative triumph, but that album wasn't well reviewed at the time. And I don't know what Mutt could have done other than make the production a little better. I personally don't mind the production, but they got a lot of complaints about that. So right off the bat, I'm sure that album cover didn't help either. Not that this was a band with great album covers, but yeah, it just seemed like and it's possible that maybe the label wasn't behind it as much because the big producer's not there, sort of thing. The proven wrong, proven right thing. They were proven wrong in going away and self-producing this album because it was a massive drop from For Those About to Rock, which sold what is it? I always forget. It's either 4 or 7 times platinum. It's big. It's still big, right? Yeah. On of course, Back in Black is absolutely massive. But so yeah, I thought that was that's an interesting one where you don't know what the special sauce is that this guy's going to bring. Is he probably is going to tear apart the songs a little more. He's also going to work on those backing vocals a little more. But yeah, as far as the deep fans go of AC/DC, that's still a creative triumph, right? And my last one of this batch is the Glass Spider tour of David Bowie. So he's got this, it's basically a trilogy of albums that start with this one, and then go to this one, and then go to Never Let Me Down, which is what the Glass Spider tour was based on. And it's, it did turn out to be a commercial triumph. I guess the hangover of the great success of Let's Dance and this kind of super commercial Bowie, playing with every 80s gizmo, known to man. I mean, all the production values and all the tropes of the 80s are all over those 3 albums. But this was a super expensive tour. People did come out for it. So it was commercially successful. But because this guy is such a creative force and a creative period, the slings and arrows actually hurt him. And he realized that it was way too over the top. And the funny thing about it is, he was trying to be a little meta with the whole thing, where it was a little bit like which U2 tour was like over the top, like the parody of a rock star. Was it Pop Music? I don't know, one of those.
Yeah, I
Um,
don't
but even just the whole, even starting with Act Tongue Baby and moving forward, the whole thing was a little bit of how excessive, and it's a little tongue in cheek how ostentatious and expensive everything is. Bowie was actually doing that back with this tour, where it was every cliche and trope and over the top thing that you can have in a stage show. He's going to throw it in there. But the critics didn't like it, and the interesting thing that happened after this is he sort of said enough. No more of these crazy, weird, super commercial albums, kind of thing, and he stepped away from that. But those three albums in a row, you can't say moving into Let's Dance is a risk. That's the other thing I had a problem with in both these episodes. It's like, is it a risk when you go out and do a commercial album? I don't know. I mean, it's in some ways it is, in some ways it isn't, but it's a safe risk, put it that way, right? It's
if
like
it works, right? If
yeah,
it works.
yeah. So this was essentially, I think he probably rude going down this path, because probably years and years later, just like when I talked to like Rick, Rick Nielsen from Cheap Trick or whatever, and he kind of regrets those commercial years of Cheap Trick. I'm sure David Bowie, he regretted these commercial years of this, and the Glass Spider tour. Yeah, it was really panned by the critics. They thought it was ridiculous looking, right? Sort of thing. So, okay. So is that, let's see, how many did I do there? One, two. Okay. That's three. Yeah.
Yeah, I like
Over to
the
you.
AC/DC pick. I think looking back, I think the album was unjustly savaged and ignored at the time. And when you really think about it, why would the label kind of not give it the push? That's your cash cow, right? It's like, all right, so Mutt's not there. They did it themselves. All right, whatever. The album cover kind of sucks. It doesn't sound as big and bold as the two that came or the three that came before it. But
Yeah.
I just don't see how you don't push that album. And I think the cool thing is, I think that Flick of the Switch has got its redemption all these years later, because I know a lot of fans have really come around on that album. And even if you ignored it at the time, now you go back to it these days and it's like it's actually a really good album. So yeah, it's a good pick. All right, my next pick is we're going to talk Van Halen late 90s, sorry. So they released Balance in 95, last album with Sammy Hagar. That lineup of the band splits up. They wait 3 years. They decide to bring on board Gary Cherone from Extreme. Now, Extreme, we're talking 98. Extreme's kind of past its heyday already at this point, so they took a risk in bringing in someone new rather than reuniting with Dave again, or bringing Sammy back again. Let's go with some completely new we've never worked with before. They quickly put together and release the album called Van Halen 3. And it's pretty apparent that maybe the singer choice wasn't the great choice. He's a great singer, but they made him sound like Sammy on the album, which is kind of strange. And the songs aren't there. And it's the only album to not go platinum plus in their catalog. This, I think, barely squeaked by to gold. And you barely have Michael Anthony playing bass on the album. Eddie basically does everything on the record. And it just kind of like foreshadows where Van Halen would go going forward, right? The album kind of gets ignored, the tour doesn't do big business, and before you know it, they basically just kind of call it a day from there, and we don't see them resurface again until many, many years later, back with Dave once again for the last album that they would do together. So I think adding a singer, at the time it sounded like a great idea because Gary, great singer, but you don't make a big move like that if you don't have the songs to back it up. And this is probably the first album you really can say, man, this where's the tunes on this album, right? There's really nothing memorable on it. So and the general public felt the same. So this one was kind of ignored. So that's my next pick. After that, we're gonna go to an album. Well, so here's a kind of like novel idea for the early 2000s. 2001. You're a band who wants to put together a new album, but you don't have any money. So what do? You do this sort of thing where you contact your fan base and you say, "Hey, we want to give you guys another record, but we're broke. So how about you help us out and contribute money to our cause, and we'll put together an album for you. That band was Marillion. The album was called Anarachnophobia, 2001, and it was their 12th studio album and basically funded by the fans. So, interesting concept, right? We've seen lots of bands do it since. Marillion's done it a number of times since. And but the thing is, you take that risk, right, to go out and reach out to the fan base to fund your album, and then you put out an album that doesn't sound anything like anything else you've ever done before. And you basically embrace like alternative rock and funk and rap and all this other stuff and new metal and all this kind of stuff. And you put out the most un-Marillion sounding album ever. So basically now the fan base has given you their hard-earned money to give you another record. We want another Marillion record, and then you kind of turn in this kind of pile of crap. So I remember when this album first came out, and I was not one of the people who added money to the fund because I really wasn't even paying attention at the time. But I remember hearing this, and I'm kind of like, "What is this stuff?" I mean, this is not Marillion at all. And this album actually kind of started my leaving Marillion in the dust for a number of years. I mean, I basically stopped listening to them for a while because I was just so disappointed with what this music was. But yeah, it's taking a big risk, right? You do something, it works, you get the money you need to fund the album, and then you just give them something completely different, and it backfired on them, unfortunately. And it took them a couple albums, I think, to really kind of work up steam once again. So that is my next pick, and from there we're gonna go to what year was this? 1983. So the band Renaissance. So if you know the history of Renaissance throughout the 70s, basically a very unique band that played this form of art rock, progressive rock, big on sweeping piano melodies, acoustic guitar, the great vocals of Annie Haslam, lead bass, no electric guitar, great drumming, big symphonic orchestral type music. And as the 70s wore on, I guess with record company pressure and a lot of these prog bands wanting to change their tune on things, they decided to embrace pop and new wave, which were the two of the more popular genres of the day. And they released an album called Timeline, which you can tell by the way they look on the cover. That doesn't look like the Renaissance we all know and love. And he's got her hair teased all up and everything like that. And it's just like what is this? Is this a synth pop trio, right? And the album is basically music like that. So now instead of all these big long epics and all these, interesting, challenging arrangements, you got all these 3 and 4 minute long songs that just, I mean, there's even a song called Missing Persons on here, right? That tells you all you need to know. But yeah, they started it with the album before, but this is full blown into that kind of synth pop, new wave type of thing. A major failure. And basically the band broke up after this. Not only was it a commercial failure, but it was the death knell for the band at the time. And obviously nobody bought it. So yeah, I think it's my last one for this round.
Is it? Okay. That was three. Okay.
Right. So,
Um,
yeah.
okay.
Yes, I did Marillion, Van Halen, and Renaissance. Yep.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. So my last four kicks off with Velvet Revolver getting together with Scott Weiland, right? And so this is kind of like, signing a band. These guys are getting together with a guy who's definitely got his substance abuse issues. These guys have been in that area before, and it's tempting. And Slash has even said that we kind of fell off the wagon during that time again too, right? But the other thing that you get with this is you get two other kinds of risks. One is because the whole story, there's just this sort of like squalid black cloud over this band the whole time when they're doing this. And then there's also in the back of your mind as a fan coming through that whole era, it's like you've got the post or dirty hair metal band getting together with the grunge guy, right? And Guns N' Roses doesn't want to be called a hair metal band, and Scott Weiland and Rob and Dean don't want to be called grunge either, right? But you get these two things coming together where as a fan coming up with through that, you said, I thought these two didn't go together. Like, why are these guys having this merger sort of thing? So I think it was a risk getting him on a number of levels. And even though this band did quite well and they sold a lot of tickets as well, this album didn't do that well, the second one, right? but there was a lot of curiosity and excitement, and on paper it kind of looks pretty cool. Of course, you got Matt Sorum and Dave Kushner in there as well. But I think it was a risk on a number of levels, and I don't think it worked because obviously with this whole situation, it's the longevity wasn't there either.
No, not at all.
Yeah. And you can imagine that there was there were definitely fights over a lot of things within this band. They probably didn't get along perfectly the whole time, right?
That was the supergroup that I thought everybody thought would really, really work. But on paper, you kind of looked at it like, how long is this really going to last? Yeah. It's like you almost knew this was going to explode and implode at some point, like fairly quickly.
And it's funny, you always paired it with Audio Slave, right? It's like, there's two of these out there, kind of thing, right? And so they stole thunder from each other, kind of thing, right? Yeah. My next one is the whole story about U2 giving their new album away for free on iTunes, taking Songs of Innocence and sticking it on everybody's Apple device, which absolutely turned out to be a big PR disaster. I've got just a couple. I don't have Songs of Innocence, but it was later around this era, right? It apparently wasn't thought to be a very good album. I think it's fine. I mean, I go for that sound any day over the noisy layered Stone Roses psychedelic pop dance disco sound of the band, right? I can't stand that whole era, right? But you were invading someone's music collection. You were taking up space. It's nice to get an album for free, kind of thing. But you're assuming and offending a lot of people by assuming that you're a U2 fan and you want this album, sort of thing, right? So it absolutely blew up in their face, and it turned out to be just this thing where it made U2 look like they couldn't win at everything they did, sort of thing, right? And it just caused bad vibes out there in the world, right?
Yeah, imagine you're like a death metal fan. You go and you buy the new Obituary album, and then all of a sudden, bloop, you got the new U2. Like, I don't want this shit, right? Can't stand it. Yeah,
exactly.
Doesn't make sense. It's like you're forcing on everybody, right? You can't do.
Yeah. And okay, so my next one is the whole Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band movie.
Good pick. Right? Yeah, wow.
With Peter Frampton, and I've even got this thing. Take a look at this thing. Music from the motion picture. Not the original soundtrack, it says in the back. Yeah, they couldn't even spring for doing new art. They just did the same thing on the back of this thing, right? But this is the big one. So huge budget went into this. And it was a movie and it was a soundtrack album and all that. And nothing got any good reviews at all. There's what the gatefold looks like in here. Aerosmith's involved in it as well. Just all sorts of stars. Steve Martin, Billy Preston. I'm looking at the back here. Alice Cooper on Because. But the big ones were the Bee Gees and Peter Frampton more or less throughout. And as the story goes, it really did put a crimp in the reputation of Peter Frampton, which was on the way down already. Anyways, this is after already dropping a long time from Frampton Comes Alive. But same with the Bee Gees. Their reputation never really recovered either. But I was looking on Wiki and apparently I think I got this right. I think it recouped on its budget, at least as a movie, right? But yeah, I know this is famously a very returned album. It's actually
it's one of the biggest bombs of that era. But yeah, I think a lot of people at the time were complaining of overexposure of both acts, right? Both Frampton and the Bee Gees, and it's just like they're everywhere. We're sick of them already. Enough is enough.
Yeah, and but you got embossing.
I always thought the packaging of the album was great.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see. My second to last is hang on. No, that's my last is Billy Squire with the whole "Rock Me Tonight" video situation, right? So did I take out? I took out the album here. So yeah, it's off of this album, right? I don't even think they thought they were taking a risk at the time. They just made this video, and Billy obviously had these effeminate gestures as he's flouncing around and jumping on the bed and dancing kind of funny. I think there's a mirror in it as well, right? And frankly speaking, one that you brought up earlier, Gary Cherone in Van Halen 3, same kind of thing, right? I saw him live, and he definitely had those same kind of moves, right? So he had this theatrical thespian,
That's what he's
actorly,
about. Yeah.
kind of. Yeah, so Rock Me Tonight video gets, notoriously panned, and it, apparently killed his career. And he still made records after this, and I think the catalog's really fine, but he was super hurt by the whole situation. It ticked him off royally, and he left the music business, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if the two are absolutely entwined, but I was looking on Wiki, seeing what did he end up doing. So he apparently got married in 2002. He's got an apartment in Manhattan, and he lives out on the island, Long Island, and he's like super involved with like conserving the wildlife area around. So he even says, there's a famous quote: "I left the industry, so the I don't ever have to work again, so the last laugh's on me," and all this kind of stuff, right? But he did leave, and I suppose, I don't know if he ever did anything for work ever again, but it sounds like he's been, and very admirably part of volunteering, to keep nature around New York in good shape, kind of thing. But yeah, so that, and song wise, it was your typical Billy Squire song. It was a good song, right?
I think
It
it's a
was
very
fun.
good song, actually. Yeah, I think it's a real shame that they made the video they did because I think that song would be held in much higher esteem if it wasn't for the video. 'Cause I
Yeah,
think the song is great. Because I remember hearing it on the radio and I was like, "Oh, this is a great song." And then you see the video, you're like, "Oh."
yeah.
It's like everybody's kind of like a response to that video. We're just kind of like in shock and horror. And yeah, he never recovered, unfortunately. But you know what? I bet you he's a guy, if he decided to make a comeback, he would do pretty well because I
Yeah.
think people have kind of forgiven that whole thing, and that wasn't his fault, right? I'm sure that
Yeah.
wasn't his idea to do that kind of.
It's funny. You could probably come up with a lot of examples. Not that I'm going to, because I don't want to do the homework on it, but you could come up with a lot of examples of people who regret what they did in videos, right? There's a lot of silly videos out there. There's
Yeah.
silly photo shoots, like the famous Queensryche Rage for photo shoot, right? That kind of thing. So yeah, I bet there's a lot of that goes on out there. So you are taking a risk. You're handing over the creatives to this director of this video,
Yeah.
and saying, "All right, do what you're doing," or you either push back or you don't push back, or it just comes out, and then you might regret it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, all right, that's all of mine.
All right. My next pick is from 1994. So Leonard Skinner got back together and reunited in the late 80s, and with Johnny Van Zant filling up his lead vocal slot in place of his deceased brother Ronnie. And the band released a couple records that were pretty well received, just kind of getting back to business of creating Southern rock, brought a lot of the surviving members back on board. You got new people coming in, whatnot, from other Southern rock bands. But in 1994, they decide to, well, we had all these other bands that were doing well with this whole idea of unplugged thing, because it was really big on MTV at the time. So they put out an album called Endangered Species, which basically included covers and acoustic unplugged takes on some of their classic songs. Unfortunately, they were a little too late to the game and it didn't really do much of anything. And it kind of, at the time, kind of derailed them. And I think they went through lots of lineup changes afterwards. So it proved to be not the big smash that I think that they were hoping for. It worked for a lot of other bands, Kiss being one of them. Didn't quite work for them. So they kind of had to rejig and move on. And that's what happens, right? You took the risk, didn't work. Hey, whatever. Next one from that, I'm going to go with Fight for the Rock by Savatage. So after a barnstorming couple of albums out of the gate, Sirens, you got Power of the Night, right? The record label kind of convinces the band and Paul O'Neill to do a commercial, hair metal, glam metal, whatever you want to call it, is all the rage at the time. So like, oh, we can write songs like that, whatever. And they put out this album, and it just gets panned by the fans, just completely just tanks and stalls really their momentum at the time. Maybe they said, well, we can write, when there's covers on here, it just doesn't work at all. And they turn around after this disaster, and they do, of course, Hall of the Mountain King, which would kind of put them back in the place where they wanted to be. But yeah, this, it's funny. All these years later, I remember buying this when it came out, and I'm like, what the hell is this? It's like, as you're expecting another Power of the Night or Sirens or whatnot, or Dungeons Are Calling, and nothing like this at all. But looking back on it, it's not terrible. But if you look at their overall catalog, it's probably their worst album. So yeah, that's next. Um, Talk about a band kind of totally doing an about face of what they're best at. and trying to let's just do a commercial album and see what happens, whether the record label were pushing them into it or not. Gentle Giant, Giant for a Day. I've talked about this many times on the channel before. This basically takes their really complicated medieval progressive rock sound that's got all these different instruments and recorders and sax and guitars and a million different keyboards, and we're just going to write short little snappy pop songs, and it doesn't work. This is not a band that should be doing short little snappy pop songs. It's got one of the worst covers of all time, and really none of the songs are all that memorable. It just doesn't sound like Gentle Giant at all. And they rebounded with the next album, kind of trying to get back to what they do best. But then by then the 80s are here. They decided to just call and pack it in, and that was that. So yeah, an experimentation to completely change their sound did not work. And my last pick for the day. So let's take a very cool band that defies categorization. Are they prog rock? Are they art rock? They dabble with new wave. They dabble with pop. They dabble with hard rock. And let's just do an album that throws all that out the door. And let's basically just do a homage to the Beatles. Utopia's Deface the Music. Probably many, many years too late. I mean, what was this? This was what, 1980, I think. I remember being absolutely horrified when this came out. First of all, not only are they doing like a kind of a Beatles type of thing, they're even taking like melodies and things like that, and just basically doing their interpretation of classic Beatles pop song. And again, they're doing the really early Beatles pop stuff, not the more psychedelic era. And to me, it sound hey, if you love this sort of thing, I'm sure you really liked it. This didn't do big business at the time, and I think for me, the hardcore Utopia fan, because I was a really big fan of the band at the time, I was absolutely horrified with this, and I was just kind of like, if I want to listen to the Beatles, I'll go listen to the Beatles. I don't want to do it. To me, it came across as like a parody of the Beatles, and it
You know
doesn't
what
work.
the big risk is there? The risk is using the name, right? I mean, that could have been a smash hit album if you would have
Could
just
have
had this,
been,
one of those great, dream PR campaigns about it. It's like, oh, the
yeah,
Beatles are back. Who are these guys? We don't even know who this band is.
yeah.
This just arrived on our desk, right? And we put it out, and oh my God, we think it's the Beatles, right? But we don't
How
know,
about
right?
you
That
don't
whole
even put the
flashy
name of the
campaign.
band anywhere on the cover, and you somehow convince the record labels to play or the radio stations to play a couple of songs off of here, because it
Yeah.
does sound like the second coming of the Beatles,
Oh,
even more so than like a
absolutely.
Badfinger, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this was like complete Beatles ripoff, and I think they did it.
Yeah.
They were very serious in their intent here. This was not meant to be a joke.
Yeah.
But it just got completely ignored by the public. I mean, this didn't sell anything. Granted, Utopia were not a big band at the time, but you would think after, a decade of not having the Beatles around, that something so obviously meant to be a mimicking of the Fab Four, this
Yeah.
just didn't do what they expected to. Again, it's 1980, right? It's the early 80s, whatever. But maybe if they had done this in 72 or something like that, maybe this would
Well,
have.
or the idea is like the label says this is just something we found, in a demo bin in 1965 in England, and we think it's a lost something or other. We don't know what it is, but we're going to put it out, right? We think it
Yeah.
sounds really good, right?
And then you tell people who it is later on after they've already bought it, right? It's like, oh yeah, this is Todd Rundgren in Utopia.
Or you say the Beatles stole their sound from this album, right? This is actually dated, August 1961, right? Kind of thing, right? And you've got the whole reels, and it's all written on there, and all the tracks and everything. It's like,
And they even went out and toured and they dressed like the Beatles and they
yeah,
played, they got their Rickenbackers out. It was just so
yeah,
ridiculous. But again, and a lot of people really love this record. I personally never liked it at all. And I still had to go out and buy it, but it's like whatever. And
yeah,
I didn't. It's funny, I didn't buy it at the time, but I heard the whole album because I had a friend who bought it back in the day. And then when the CDs started buying CDs, I was like, well, I got to have it, got to complete the collection, right? But man, if I played this 10 times over the last 40 years, that's probably a lot. It just, to me, it's
yeah,
like, I get what they were doing. I understand. And I understand a lot of people really like this album a lot, but it didn't catch on to the general public. And I personally, I want to hear Utopia doing what they do best. And as a one-off, yeah, whatever, but not really for me. So,
yeah. Cool, nice.
All right, Martin, what's going on over on the Contrarians and the podcast and any new
Well,
books?
first I've got some honorable mentions here that
Oh, okay, there
fell
you
off
go.
my
Okay,
list.
good.
So yeah, I've got Stars Attention Shopper going commercial for Stars.
Oh,
I
yeah, there
had
you go. Yeah.
I had Garth Brooks becoming Chris Gaines. Wanting to do some different music under a very casual sort of disguise. Rob Halford doing Two Voyeurs, becoming an industrial act. Beatles, the Butcher cover. Metallica getting together with Lou Reed and doing Lulu.
Oh, yeah, that's a huge one right there.
Yeah. Machine Head going new metal. Entombed to a little extent doing that as well. Yeah, very obscure one. Holocaust throwing away their, momentum and doing hologram and being proggy over here and hardcore over here and just kind of like Holocaust. And then a lot of those new wave bands trying something commercial. Um, Kiss the Elder, little bit of a risk there doing a concept album, and then Woodstock 99, right? That whole
Oh,
thing, right? I don't know what the risk there is. The risk is forgetting that fire exists. Or the risk is getting Fred Durst, involved in the whole thing, right? So who knows what exactly the risk is there. The risk is being too greedy and not having water around and all that kind of stuff. That whole story, there's a number of risks, right? I remember when we were doing Metal Evolution, we did the new metal episode. I interviewed a bunch of guys who were involved in the putting together of that thing, and it was quite a story hearing. And then we saw fire over there, and then we saw fire over there, and all this stuff, right? And it's like we were getting concerned, right? So I thought that was a funny one too. But yeah, out there in the world, we got the Contrarians, of course, as well, our video channel, and I do my audio podcast, History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff, and got the books at martinpopoff.com and all that stuff as well. We got the podcast with John Gaffney, the ACDC podcast that we do over at Pantheon as well. So that's all that's going on.
well, yeah, I almost picked The Elder by Kiss for my list, but the reason I didn't at the time when it came out, I thought it was a risk that completely bombed. But I've really kind of softened my stance on the Elder over the years. I think a lot of people have. So it's like I kind of was like, you know what, I'm not going to put it on this list because I don't really agree with the fact that it was a risk that totally sucked. At the time, yeah. Now I'm kind of like, yeah, you know what? It's okay. It's all right. It's still a risk. It still didn't do well, right? It still alienated a lot of their fans. So I think it's great to include and at least discuss here. One that I did want to mention here, which again is it's not really it could be seen as a positive, but Spock's beard when Neil Morse decided to leave the band back in God, what was that, 2003 or something like that? They decided kind of like what Genesis did. They decided to take their drummer. Nick DiVirgilio and promote him to be the new singer for the band. But the kind of the way that this risk didn't quite work out as they went and released an album called Feel Euphoria as the first album with Nick on vocals. And it's a really different sounding album for Spock's Beard. It's less of like a prog album, more of kind of like an up-tempo rock album, alternative rock, modern rock type of thing. So it was kind of a risk that I think maybe alienated a few fans who were not going to stick on board with the band now with Neil no longer being on keyboards and vocals anymore. But I think they eventually got back their audience over the next couple of albums. They returned more to their classic sound. So that was kind of one I had left over. But yeah, as far as what's going on here on the channel, we've got the professor's picks hopefully coming up later today. I'm going to be kind of out doing some other things I got to deal with for the next couple hours. But if not, it'll be over the weekend. We've got Jamie Laszlo and the review crew coming up tomorrow. And we've got ranking the albums on Sunday. George Lamy and Rob Lasante will be ranking the catalog of Dark Water. Very cool progressive metal band. So that's coming up this weekend. I also have, I hopefully we'll get to my episode where I'm talking about 10 radio hits, big popular songs that I still really kind of like to hear, and then 10 I never need to hear again, right? And then the caveat is that these are all, both the good ones and the bad ones, have to be songs that I never added to my collection. I don't own these on any album or anything like that. So I've got the list ready to go. I just need to record it. So that's coming up this weekend as well. So stay tuned for that, and stay tuned for Martin and I back here in 2 weeks. This is on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube all together. all the damn time. Please subscribe if you haven't already and click on that notification bell so you get alert of all of our content as it posts. And please hit that like button before you leave. And we'll see you back here at the Funhouse in 2 weeks, everybody. Thanks for watching. For Martin Popoff, I am Pete Pardo. Enjoy your weekend. Please go hit up Martin on all his other ventures. It's always lots of fun over there. And we'll see you next time. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.